he would say to him, if I don't kill my grandma, I'm not getting into heaven. So he had it warped. He killed his entire family, and he's like, that's how I get to heaven.
It didn't seem like it was wind or like slow. It was like immediate push.
And I like wanted to turn my headlamp on, and I just hear like.
So we heard like scratching sounds and like different knocks on like doors and stuff. And I think even one of our cameras like flipped over or something.
I don't know what it is, but I feel kind of unsafe. If something happens tomorrow, you have to.
On the Joe Rogan Experience number 1947, featuring Chris Distefano, Chris tells Joe a story about Ronald DeFeo Jr. from a guard who worked at the prison that DeFeo Jr. was serving time in. Now let's really quickly talk about who Ronald DeFeo Jr. actually was, because his name might not ring a bell right away, but trust me, you definitely know the story. So Ronald DeFeo Jr. was born in Brooklyn, New York in 1951, and he grew up in Amityville in Long Island, New York. He was the oldest of 5 kids in what looked like your typical all-American family, at least from the outside. But behind closed doors, things were a lot darker. His father was super strict and allegedly abusive, and DeFeo himself had a pretty troubled upbringing. He struggled with anger, he used drugs heavily, and had a reputation for being kind of volatile. Now, what made DeFeo infamous happened on November 13th, 1974. That's the day he murdered his entire family. He murdered his parents and his 4 younger siblings. They were all shot to death while they were sleeping in their beds, and it was absolutely horrifying. He initially tried to blame the murders on a mob hit, but then later confessed to the killings himself. He was convicted in 1975 and was sentenced to 6 consecutive life sentences. Now here's a story from a prison guard who regularly interacted with Ronald DeFeo Jr. at the Sullivan Correctional Facility in the town of Fallsburg, New York. Take a listen.
He said, but every morning he would make Ronald DeFeo Jr. like a little breakfast and his little, they had like little hot stoves in there. They would let prisoners like Jerry, after you did enough time, give you some stuff. He'd make a little bacon and stuff for him. And he said every morning, like clockwork, 7 days a week, every morning, bring Ronald his food and say, how was your night, Ronald? How are you feeling? He was like, good, I feel good. I didn't kill my grandma. It's the only thing. I killed everyone in that house, but I did not get my grandma. So, but everything else, other than that, it's good. And Jerry'd be like, okay. And then keep moving. So he's like, still, he's in prison for, and that is true. The only one he didn't kill in that house, the grandma either got out or wasn't there, but he was like, there's no rehabilitation for that man. He genuinely believes if he does not kill he would say to him, if I don't kill my grandma, I'm not getting into heaven. So he had it warped. He killed his entire family, and he's like, that's how I get to heaven, but I gotta get the grandma. And then he died in prison recently, but I was like, whoa. I know, it's wild.
Ronald DeFeo Jr. claimed he killed his family because he believed it was the only way that they and he could get to heaven. He said he thought his family was suffering and that by killing them, he was actually saving them. He told psychologists that he heard voices, that he felt possessed, and that he truly believed what he was doing had a spiritual purpose. Now let's quickly rewind to the aftermath of the DeFeo murders. So after the DeFeo murders, the house at 112 Ocean Avenue sat empty for about a year. Then in December of 1975, George and Kathy Lutz moved in with their 3 kids. Now they knew about the murders, like it was, part of why they got such a good deal on the house, but they figured, hey, bad stuff happened, but it's over now. Right? Well, according to them, absolutely not. The Lutz family only lasted 28 days in that house before fleeing in the middle of the night, claiming that the place was haunted to hell and back. And not just like creaky floors or flickering lights, like we're talking full-blown like horror movie stuff. There was apparently green slime oozing from the walls, there were cold spots, there were doors slamming on their own, swarms of flies in the dead of winter, and even a demonic pig-like creature with glowing red eyes. Oh, and George Lutz swore he was waking up every night at 3:15 a.m., which that's the exact time that Ronald DeFeo Jr. had murdered his family. Now they brought in a priest to bless the house, and according to him, he heard a deep voice growl, "Get out." The Lutzes eventually did get out, and they never moved back in. But after that, their story blew up. It turned into a best-selling book, The Amityville Horror, and then a hit movie in 1979, which sparked a whole franchise of sequels, remakes, and spin-offs. And whether you believe the haunting really happened or not, it's become one of the most well-known paranormal stories of all time. And now going back to the idea that Ronald DeFeo Jr. murdered his family to send them to heaven, and that, he would go to heaven if he murdered his whole family, that idea got completely overshadowed by the Amityville horror phenomenon. Once the Lutzes moved out and started sharing their ghost stories, the public focus shifted hard toward demons, haunted houses, and paranormal chaos. But the story from the prison guard shows that the Amityville haunting, didn't need ghosts to be terrifying. I mean, you had this young man spiraling mentally and emotionally, likely dealing with a lifetime of trauma, addiction, and untreated psychological issues. And somewhere in that spiral, he convinced himself that murdering his family was not just justified, but it was spiritually necessary. He thought it was a way to free them, to save them. And that's not just, chilling, it's tragic. And even after the murders, Ronald DeFeo still believed that he needed to murder his grandma to be sent to heaven and to send her to heaven. On the Joe Rogan Experience number 1922, featuring paranormal investigators Sam and Colby talk about one of their first paranormal investigations, which happened to be at the Stanley Hotel in Estes Park, Colorado. Now, the Stanley Hotel is tucked away in Estes Park, Colorado, right up in the Rocky Mountains. Now, at first glance, it just looks like a beautiful historic resort. And I mean, it is, because it was built back in 1909 by a guy named Freeland Oscar Stanley. Now, Freeland Oscar Stanley came to Colorado for health reasons. He had tuberculosis, and back then, doctors thought that, clean mountain air could heal you, which, spoiler, it didn't cure the disease, but he did fall in love with the place and decided to build this massive hotel for wealthy guests from the East Coast. Now, here's where things get pretty creepy. Pretty much since it opened, people have talked about strange things happening at the Stanley, but the big turning point, that came in 1974 when none other than Stephen King stayed there. He and his wife were the only guests that night, which, is already spooky enough, but they stayed in room 217, and let's just say he had one hell of a night. He dreamed about his son being chased through the hotel halls, and he woke up in a cold sweat, and by the time it was morning, he basically already had the idea for the Shining movie. Now, the movie wasn't filmed at the Stanley Hotel, but the hotel totally owns that, creepy reputation, and honestly, it kind of earned it. People report all kinds of paranormal activity here. Like room 217, where King stayed, is supposed to be haunted by a former housekeeper named Elizabeth Wilson, and guests say that lights turn on and off, things move on their own, and some even wake up to find their luggage unpacked, like, the housekeeper's still doing her job. Then there's the 4th floor, which used to be the servants' quarters, and a place, where kids stayed. People claim that they hear children laughing, running, or even bouncing balls when, there are no kids around. And there's even talk of the original owner, Freeland Oscar Stanley, still wandering the halls in his old-fashioned suit, just casually checking in on things like a ghostly manager.
The Stanley Hotel is pretty widely known as the most haunted place in the United States. Like
hotel-wise, at least.
Hotel-wise, yeah.
What did you guys experience there?
That was one of our first experiences ever. I think that was like
before we had equipment, really.
Before we had equipment, that video is our most viewed video. I think it was right after our arrest, and it wasn't like we got crazy equipment type of things, but we heard scratching sounds and different knocks on doors and stuff. And I think even one of our cameras flipped over or something. But that was 4 years ago or 5 years ago.
Well, what's interesting about the Stanley is there's this part that's literally in the front room called the vortex, where there's just a bunch of mirrors on each side that are pointed towards each other, and the theory is in the paranormal world that can create a portal, mirrors facing each other, or spirits can become trapped through mirrors and stuff. And so that was like the coolest part of the entire place. It's known to be a Disneyland resort for ghosts. And so anything could like pass in there. It's like a giant portal.
There's one of the most famous paranormal pictures ever taken at the Stanley. If you just type in like Stanley
look this
Hotel, like ghost photo, this is all over in the news. There's
Like
two.
staircase ghost or something.
Staircase ghost is huge. But yeah, we just went recently back this last year. We still haven't been able to get to the main room, which was what The Shining was inspired by.
Sam and Colby mentioned the vortex in the Stanley Hotel, which is actually just like the main staircase. Now, when people say vortex in ghost stories or paranormal talk, they're usually referring to a kind of spiritual energy hotspot. Think of it kind of like a ghostly like roundabout where spirits supposedly enter and exit our world. And according to a lot of people, guests, ghost hunters, and even some of the staff, the grand staircase at the Stanley is exactly that. Some people describe feeling dizzy or lightheaded when they, walk through that area. Others say they've seen flashes of light, cold spots, or even shadowy figures passing by. And there are tons of stories about guests, taking pictures on these stairs only to discover strange, unexplained figures or orbs in the background. Paranormal investigators who have visited the hotel say that this area has really high electromagnetic activity, which is often linked to ghost sightings. And what's even creepier is some people believe that this vortex is why the Stanley has so much supernatural activity in the first place. Like it's a kind of like spiritual gateway keeping the energy flowing and the ghosts, well, coming and going. Now, another creepy story that Sam and Colby share on the Joe Rogan Experience number 1922 is about when they went ghost hunting at Waverly Hills Sanitarium in Louisville, Kentucky. But before we hear their story, let me tell you about the history of Waverly Hills Sanitarium. So picture this, it's the early 1900s and tuberculosis, also known back then as the White Plague, is absolutely tearing through the population. Like it was brutal. There were no antibiotics, no real treatment, and once you had it, your chances weren't great, especially in places like Louisville, Kentucky, where the humid climate made it a breeding ground for tuberculosis. In 1910, they built a small 2-story hospital on this remote hill outside of town, mainly to isolate tuberculosis patients from the general population. Now that place was Waverly Hills. And at first it was pretty modest, just enough to house around 40 to 50 patients. But as the outbreak worsened, they expanded. Big time. By 1926, a much larger Gothic-style structure was built. This new 5-story building could accommodate over 400 patients. It was meant to be self-sufficient with everything from its own water supply to a post office. I mean, it was basically a small city built just for the sick and dying. Now, medicine at the time was, let's just say, experimental. They thought fresh air and sunlight were key to treating tuberculosis. So they had these massive open air wards where patients would lie in beds, even in the winter, completely exposed to the elements. There are actual photos of people covered in snow while lying in bed. Like, I couldn't even imagine that. Some of the treatments were just downright horrific by, today's standards. One common procedure was something called thoracoplasty, where they, would literally remove parts of the ribs to allow the lungs to expand. No anesthesia like we know today, and the survival rate wasn't great either. I mean, people suffered, like, a lot, and not just physically, but emotionally and mentally. I mean, families were torn apart, patients were isolated for years, sometimes until they died, and speaking of death, there was a lot of it. So much, in fact, that they built what became known as the body chute, or more officially, the death tunnel. It was this long, dark underground tunnel that led from the hospital down the hill. Staff used it to discreetly transport bodies so that, the other patients wouldn't see how many people were dying. The thinking was, if the patients didn't see the constant flow of death, maybe they wouldn't give up hope. But today, that tunnel is one of the most infamous spots for paranormal activity. Waverly Hills closed its doors as a tuberculosis hospital in 1961, basically after antibiotics came out that basically just wiped out tuberculosis in the United States. But that building sat abandoned for a bit and then reopened briefly as a geriatric facility in the 60s and 70s, but that too was shut down, reportedly due to neglect and abuse of the patients. After that, it fell into disrepair and became the thing of urban legends. And here's where the hauntings start to come in. People who visit Waverly today talk about all kinds of creepy experiences. Apparitions in the hallways, disembodied voices, footsteps when no one is there, shadow figures, cold spots, I mean, you name it, they had it. Some believe the spirits are those of the patients who died in pain, confusion, or fear, and others think it's the leftover energy from, so much trauma concentrated in one place. I mean, over 60,000 people are rumored to have died there, and that number's, sort of debated. Some say it's more like 8,000, but either way, it's a lot of death in one place. Now, there are specific ghosts people claim to see over and over again. There's the spirit of a little boy named Timmy, who allegedly rolls a ball across the floor in the old children's ward. Visitors will sometimes bring balls, and they swear that they've seen them move on their own. Which takes us to Sam and Colby's story, where they basically talk about how these ghost hunters that they were investigating the Waverly Hills with basically set up a ball and recorded it for hours. Take a listen.
What was that ball? Like, where was that ball, and who set the camera up for that?
So that wasn't our video, but the people that we went with, who are our friends, that was their video. They had been to that place like 3 or 4 times, and one of the times they had set that ball down because the story goes that the person, the spirit or whatever that is moving that ball is like a little kid, and it's a sanitarium. It was like really sad, but the kids were allowed to like play on that level, and so if you put a ball down, it's supposedly, if there's someone there, it will move. And they put that little rope there specifically so that no wind would get it. Like, you'd have to actually put like an immense force to push it. And so our buddies who had been there before filmed, I think they said it was like a 3-hour clip. 3 hours of this ball sitting in that same area, that's why we put the ball there, of just nothingness. And then, like you said, it didn't seem like it was wind or like slow. It was like immediate push. It was like boom, and it like went off the screen.
That's what it looks like on the video. The video is bizarre.
It was a video because, I don't know, technical challenges or whatever. He was filming his YouTube video. I don't know why he was filming the video, but that's why it looks so bad. But yeah, basically he witnessed this ball after 3 hours randomly just getting, how does it get that kinetic energy to boom, move? And it's not
no
like
wind.
There's also room 502, which is possibly the most notorious spot in the entire building. Legend says a nurse either, hung herself or was pushed from the window of that room after discovering she was pregnant and unmarried. People report seeing her apparition, hearing her voice, or feeling an overwhelming sense of dread when they enter that room. And then there's the body shoot. I mean, people have said that they've heard moaning, whispers, and even seen figures darting through the darkness. Paranormal investigators from shows like Ghost Hunters and Ghost Adventures have been there and have claimed that they've captured all kinds of unexplainable evidence. On the Joe Rogan Experience number 2013 featuring Paul Rosalie, Paul talks about the Amazon rainforest and how easy it is to get lost. Now, Paul Rosalie is an American conservationalist, naturalist, author, and documentary filmmaker known for his work in the rainforest and wildlife conservation, particularly in the Amazon. He gained wider public attention in 2014 for a controversial Discovery Channel special titled Eaten Alive, where he planned to be swallowed by an anaconda while wearing a specifically designed suit, though the stunt was ultimately called off before the snake consumed him. But before we hear Paul's stories from the Amazon, let's take a moment to talk about what the Amazon rainforest actually is, because this isn't just, your average forest. The Amazon rainforest spans over 2 million square miles. To put that into perspective, it's bigger than half of the entire United States. It stretches across 9 countries, but the majority of it lies in Brazil. And inside this green labyrinth is one of the most complex ecosystems on Earth. Like, we're talking about over 16,000 species of trees, more than 400 billion individual trees, and an absolutely mind-blowing amount of biodiversity. There are jaguars, anacondas, poison dart frogs, electric eels, and giant centipedes that can literally kill bats. I mean, even the bugs are terrifying. There's a species of ant called the bullet ant, and its sting is considered one of the most painful experiences a human can endure. Like, it's basically getting shot. Hence, the name. And it's not just the animals that are dangerous. I mean, the terrain itself is so unforgiving. You've got dense foliage, swamps, rivers with currents strong enough to sweep you away, and islands of floating vegetation that look like solid ground until you step on them and sink. Which takes us to Paul's story. Take a listen.
I was very lost and very alone, and I was like on like day 6 or something of being lost. I don't remember. No, it wasn't that long of a solo. But I was lost and I was scared, and I was in a hammock.
How did you get lost?
Well, as soon as you leave the river, like, you could literally walk 15 feet and then be like, I'm just going to come right back. And the jungle will like Blair Witch you. Because it's all green. So you just like think you know what you're doing. Just last week, I took people, I wanted to cross from one trail to another trail. And I was like, I'm a guide, I can do this. And I came back out on the same trail like a half hour later. And I was like, yep, that's what I meant to do. Let's go. And like, it happens to JJ all the time.
Really?
You cannot find your way in the
Do
jungle.
you use a compass?
Don't use a compass.
Why not?
Because actually, apparently some of the iron content in some of the saps in the trees pulls the needle. It doesn't work really well.
Even the trees are trying to trick you. Oh my God.
GPSs run out of batteries. It's like you really just, you have to learn your bushcraft. You have to learn how to navigate in the jungle. And it's like, which is pretty much, you have to get just amazing at dead reckoning and remembering your course, because it's so dense that like we play with people. We go, go see if you can go from here to there. And it's like, they can't go there. They can't do that as soon as you leave the river. So like I had gone out on this solo, gotten lost, gotten scared, and then been like, oh shit, what if I just like into the wilded myself? What if now I'm gonna be the next kid that went and died in the Amazon? And like I like slept in the hammock, but this is like as I was learning, so I didn't realize that the hammock that I had bought had a mosquito net on top, but the back was not mosquito proof, so they could stick through. So my back was being destroyed by mosquitoes as I'm trying to sleep. And like a couple of nights of that. And so I finally fall asleep and I wake up in the middle of the night and I hear breathing right next to my face. And I like wanted to turn my headlamp on and I just hear like right here. Like I could feel her breath. And I was like 6 inches away from a jaguar's face. And she just like, and then left. And she just came in. She wanted to see what that was. She was like, you're not going to move. That's what you're not going to do. She growled like right into my ear.
Now here's another story that shows just how merciless the Amazon rainforest can be. Let me introduce you to Yossi Ginsberg, a 21-year-old Israeli backpacker who found himself stranded alone in the Bolivian jungle for 3 weeks. He had no GPS, no food, and no way out. It all started in 1981. Yossi was like a lot of young adventurers, hungry, for the unknown. He was traveling through South America when he met 3 other travelers, Marcus Stam, a Swiss teacher, Kevin Gale, an American photographer, and Karl Ruprechter, an Austrian who claimed to be a geologist. Karl told them he knew of an uncontacted tribe deep in the Bolivian jungle and that he could guide them there. In the spirit of youthful recklessness, the group agreed. They set off into the jungle with limited supplies, thinking they'd be out in a few days. But the further they went, the more obvious it became that Karl had no idea what he was doing. The terrain was brutal. Thick jungle, relentless rain, mud that sucked you in up to your knees, and swarms of insects that never let up. After just a few days, they were starving, blistered, and exhausted. Tension started to rise. Marcus had trench foot and couldn't walk. The group split. Karl and Marcus turned back on foot, never to be seen again, while Yossi and Kevin decided to continue downriver using a handmade raft, which was ultimately a bad idea. As they navigated the wild river, they hit rapids, and really violent ones. The raft shattered and Yossi and Kevin were separated. Kevin made it to shore and was eventually rescued, but Yossi, not so lucky. He was now completely alone in the Amazon rainforest with no food, no gear, and no idea where he was. And this is where the story becomes almost unbelievable. Yossi survived for 3 weeks, battling the rainforest and his own mind. He ate monkey meat, bird eggs, and anything else he could find. He was attacked by fire ants, bitten by parasites, and nearly drowned in a flash flood. At one point, he fell into quicksand and had to pull himself out by grabbing onto vines. He hallucinated, believing that he was being followed by a woman, and he even built a shelter for her. And then there was the infection. One of the wounds on his forehead got infested with maggots, and like dozens of them. He had to remove them one by one, using the tip of a burning cigarette given to him by rescuers after he was finally found. That's right, after 21 days alone in the jungle, just as he was about to give up, a search team found him. He was barely alive, he was covered in insect bites, he was 35 pounds lighter, and he was mentally wrecked, but he was alive. Today, Yossi's story is considered, one of the greatest Amazon survival tales ever told. On the Joe Rogan Experience number 1100, featuring Liz Phair, Joe Rogan asks Liz Phair if she has ever had any psychic premonitions or, a vision before a future event. Now, before Liz Phair talks to Joe Rogan about her psychic premonition story, she shares with Joe that she 100% believes in ghosts. Now, Liz claims that she often sees ghosts. She also claims that she could see something like a chair or a room, and she can almost sense if something bad happened in that chair or, in the room. Now, this prompts Joe Rogan to discuss the stone tape theory, which we have covered a few times on this channel already, but super quickly for you guys who don't know, the stone tape theory is basically the idea that certain buildings, especially older ones made of stone or other dense materials, can somehow record emotional or traumatic events. The theory suggests that intense human experiences, especially ones involving fear, stress, or tragedy, can leave behind some kind of psychic imprint on the physical environment. And then under the right conditions, maybe a shift in the atmosphere, a certain time of year, or even just, the right kind of energy, those moments get replayed kind of like a ghostly rerun. According to this theory, these hauntings aren't really spirits with consciousness. They're more like echoes, residual energy just playing back a scene over and over again, totally unaware of the present. So for example, if somebody got murdered in a house, that traumatic energy was essentially captured by the walls of that house. So when people, years after the tragedy go into that house, the walls just sort of, replay that traumatic event, which, would result in a haunting. So just staying with this example, Liz Phair would, in theory, walk into this house and be able to sense that there was a murder. But anyways, here is her psychic premonition story that she experienced right before a fire in LA in 2018. Take a listen.
The night before that fire, I was out walking with my son, and I just felt incredibly uneasy. And he suffered from asthma when he was young and really badly. So when there was a lot of particulate matter in the air, or if it was just bad air conditions, I would tend to be very worried about him and keep him home or, inform the teachers or whatever it was. He'd get really bad asthma attacks. And so I have a predisposition to be on the alert. But this is the night before, no fire had started yet. And I just was very anxious, and I couldn't settle down. And I couldn't think for months. I hadn't been like that. And I said to him, I'm like, I don't know what it is, but I feel kind of unsafe. If something happens tomorrow, you have to be my witness that I sensed something was coming. Now, you probably think I'm this horrible mother. I never do this. It happens I think I've said that to him twice in our entire life. And I forgot about it. The next day, I forgot about it. I didn't think about it at all until, we were socked in this sort of brown muck as we are, and the sun became the eye of Sauron, and everyone's freaking out, and we're looking at all these images, and I was so distracted by all these images that I completely forgot my sense the night before. And what I think that was, until I remembered it, then I called up and I'm like, and I think it's more I don't know something's coming, but I have maybe the envelope of time is a little bit more mushy than we think. Maybe we perceive time as very orderly and very linear, but maybe it's really not. And it could be pushing back, the experience. Maybe I had the experience before I perceived the experience, or I don't know what that is, but that happens to me a lot.
Now, I think what Liz says at the end of her story is a very interesting concept. She basically describes that time may not be linear. You wake up, you eat breakfast, you go about your day and move forward through time, moment by moment. The past is behind you and the future is ahead of you. Now, that's linear time, but there have been many theories challenging that idea. And the one I want to talk about today is the block universe theory. So basically, imagine the universe as a giant 4-dimensional cube. Now, inside this cube, everything that has ever happened, is happening, or will happen already exists. The past, present, and future are all equally real. They're practically just different coordinates in space-time. So from this perspective, you're not moving through time, you're just experiencing one particular slice of this big cosmic loaf. Right now, you're in the now slice, But all the other slices, the day you were born, the day you die, and everything in between, they still exist. You just aren't currently aware of them. Think of it like a flip book. Each page is a moment in time. You can flip through it to see the movement, but all of the pages are always there. You don't destroy the previous page when you turn to the next one. It just feels like time is flowing. In the block universe, every page exists permanently. And maybe, just maybe, there are certain people out there who get glimpses of the pages ahead. Like Liz said, she got this feeling that, there was going to be something bad that was going to happen. And the next day she woke up and, fire started to spread across LA. So think about it like with this book right here. This page right here is today, but I can flip back a few pages and this page will be what happened a few days ago. But I could also go forward, let's say to this page, and this will be what's happening in the next 5 years. So pretty much all of us, can't really go and read the pages ahead, but maybe there are some people like Liz who can kind of, get a sneak peek of those pages before she gets to them, basically. Hopefully that makes sense. But anyways, these have been 5 of the creepiest stories ever told on the Joe Rogan Experience. If you guys enjoyed, please be sure to leave a like and subscribe, post notifications on. And without further ado, hope you guys have a great rest of your day. Peace out.